I'm Cassandra Gomez. I'm 29. And last Sunday at brunch in downtown Millbrook, my sister Victoria called me a pathetic loser in front of her fiancé Ryan. What Victoria didn't know was that Ryan Henderson works for me. Not just works for me, he reports directly to me as Senior Marketing Director at Zenith Digital Solutions, the company I built from nothing into a $40 million enterprise. But to my family, I'm still Cassie, the college dropout who couldn't handle the pressure of pre-law at Westfield University, the sister who moved to Millbrook 5 years ago to find herself after what they call my breakdown, the one who supposedly works some vague job in digital marketing that nobody really understands or cares to ask about. Victoria had chosen Bistro Laurent for brunch. You know, the kind of place where they charge $18 for avocado toast and the mimosas come in champagne flutes. She'd specifically requested the corner table by the window, prime real estate for showing off her 3-carat engagement ring that caught the morning light just perfectly. Everything about the setup screamed performance, and I should have seen what was coming. Ryan looked uncomfortable from the moment they sat down. He kept fidgeting with his napkin, avoiding eye contact with me, and I could see the recognition flickering behind his eyes. We'd had a video conference just 3 days earlier about the Peterson Industries campaign, a $2.3 million account that he'd been managing brilliantly. He knew exactly who I was. But Victoria? Victoria had no clue. "So, Cassie," Victoria began, her voice dripping with that condescending tone I'd grown to hate, "are you still doing that, whatever it is you do with computers?" I was cutting into my Belgian waffle, trying to stay calm. "Digital marketing, Vic, same as always." Right, she waved dismissively. "Ryan, you should hear about my sister's little hobby. She moved here after dropping out of law school, couldn't handle the pressure, you know, and now she does some freelance computer stuff from her apartment." Ryan's fork froze midway to his mouth. I watched his face carefully, wondering how he'd handle this. We'd never discussed my family, and I kept my personal life completely separate from Zenith. To him, I was Cassandra Gomez, CEO and founder. To my family, I was just Cassie, the disappointment. "Freelance?" Ryan asked quietly, his voice strained. "Oh yes," Victoria continued, warming up to her favorite topic, my failures. She keeps saying she's building something, but honestly, I think she's just afraid to get a real job. You know how it is with some people. They'd rather pretend to be entrepreneurs than actually work for a living. The irony was suffocating. Ryan Henderson earned $180,000 a year working for me. His bonus last quarter alone was more than Victoria made in 6 months at her corporate communications job. He drove a Tesla Model S that he'd bought after I promoted him to senior director, a promotion I personally approved after he landed 3 major accounts in 2 months. "Mom and Dad are worried about her," Victoria continued, stabbing her quinoa salad for emphasis. "She's almost 30, living alone in that tiny apartment, no real career prospects. It's honestly kind of pathetic." That's when she said it, the words that would change everything. Sometimes I think Cassie is just destined to be a loser. Like, some people are meant for success. She gestured at herself and Ryan, and others are just pathetic losers who can't figure their lives out. The restaurant seemed to go quiet around us. Ryan had gone completely pale, and I could see his hands trembling slightly as he set down his coffee cup. He was staring at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief, probably wondering how the woman who just approved his request for additional marketing budget was sitting here being called a pathetic loser by her own sister. Victoria didn't notice. She never noticed anything that didn't revolve around herself. "Don't you think, honey," she asked Ryan, reaching over to touch his arm, "don't you think people should have realistic expectations about their lives instead of chasing impossible dreams?" Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. I could practically see the internal war happening behind his eyes. He knew who I really was. He knew about the company, the success, the team of 47 employees who looked to me for leadership. He knew about the Forbes 30 Under 30 nomination, the industry awards, the speaking engagements at marketing conferences across the country. But he also knew that I'd never told my family any of it. Ryan started, then stopped, looking desperately at me.
Victoria misinterpreted his hesitation as agreement. See? Even Ryan can see it. Sometimes you just have to accept reality, Cassie. Not everyone can be successful like us. I set down my fork and looked directly at Ryan. His face was flushed, and I could see the conflict written all over his features. He was one of my best employees, someone I'd mentored and believed in. He'd been with Zenith for 2 years, had seen the company grow from 15 to nearly 50. He knew exactly what I'd built. And now he was sitting across from me, watching my sister tear me down with lies, unable to say a word without revealing everything. That's when I realized this moment was inevitable. For 5 years, I'd let my family believe whatever they wanted about my life. I'd hidden my success, downplayed my achievements, and avoided conversations about work. I'd told myself it was easier than dealing with their expectations, their need to control and judge every aspect of my life.
But watching Ryan's face, seeing the absolute shock and discomfort of someone who actually knew my worth, I realized that my silence had become its own kind of prison. The truth was about to come out. And after 5 years of being underestimated, dismissed, and called a pathetic loser, I was finally ready to let it. You see, to Victoria and my entire family, I'm the cautionary tale. The daughter who had everything handed to her and threw it all away. The sister who couldn't handle pressure and ran away to a small city to hide from her responsibilities. But what they don't know, what they've never bothered to ask about, is that I didn't run away from anything. I ran toward something extraordinary. When I left Westfield University in my junior year, I wasn't having a breakdown. I was having a breakthrough. While my classmates were memorizing tort law and constitutional amendments, I was coding until 3 in the morning, building something that would revolutionize how small businesses handle their digital marketing. I saw a gap in the market that nobody else was seeing, a way to automate social media management, email campaigns, and customer relationship management into one seamless platform. My family saw a quitter. I saw an opportunity that couldn't wait for a law degree I didn't even want. Ryan Henderson knows the real story. He was employee number 12 at Zenith Digital Solutions. When I hired him 2.5 years ago, he was a burned-out marketing coordinator at a traditional advertising firm making $45,000 a year and hating every minute of it. He'd been sending out resumes for months when he found our job posting for a marketing specialist position. I still remember his interview. He walked into our offices on Maple Street, we'd just moved out of the co-working space downtown, wearing a suit that was slightly too big and carrying a portfolio of campaigns he'd worked on at his previous job. But what struck me wasn't his resume or his presentation skills, it was his passion. When he talked about digital marketing, his whole face lit up. He understood that we weren't just selling services, we were solving real problems for real businesses. I offered him the job that same day. Starting salary, $65,000, plus equity options, plus the kind of creative freedom he'd never had before. Within 6 months, he'd increased our client retention rate by 30%. Within a year, I promoted him to senior marketing specialist. Last year, he became our senior marketing director, overseeing a team of 8 people and managing accounts worth over $15 million annually. Ryan Henderson drives a Tesla because of the work he does for my company. He owns a beautiful townhouse in Millbrook's historic district because of the salary and bonuses I approved. Just last month, he sent me a text thanking me for changing his life, for believing in him when nobody else would. And here he was, sitting across from me at Sunday brunch, watching my sister call me a pathetic loser. The disconnect was almost surreal. Victoria knows Ryan as her successful fiancé, the marketing director at some tech company who can afford nice dinners and weekend trips to wine country. She has no idea that some tech company is mine. She doesn't know that when Ryan comes home excited about a new campaign or a successful client presentation, he's talking about work I made possible. My parents think I live in a tiny apartment because I've never corrected them. The truth is, I own a 2,500 square foot loft in the converted textile mill downtown, the same building where Zenith's offices occupy the entire 3rd floor. I bought it 2 years ago, paid cash because Zenith's revenues that year exceeded $18 million. They think I'm struggling financially because I don't flash designer bags or expensive jewelry like Victoria does.
What they don't see is the investment portfolio I've built, the retirement accounts I've maxed out every year since I was 25, the emergency fund that could cover my expenses for 3 years if everything went wrong tomorrow. Victoria loves to tell people about her corporate communications job like it's some massive achievement. She makes $68,000 a year writing press releases and managing social media accounts for a mid-size insurance company. It's good work, steady work, the kind of job my parents understand and approve of. My base salary last year was $280,000. That doesn't include the equity value, the performance bonuses, or the speaking fees from the 12 conferences where I was invited to present on digital marketing innovation. But Victoria doesn't know any of that. None of them do. When I moved away to Millbrook, they assumed I was running from responsibility. The truth was that I'd identified the city as an emerging tech hub, a place where I could build something without competing against the established giants in San Francisco or New York. Millbrook had lower overhead costs, a growing population of young professionals, and a business community that was hungry for innovative marketing solutions. 5 years later, Zenith Digital Solutions employs 47 people. We're the third largest private employer in Millbrook's downtown district. The mayor invited me to join the Economic Development Committee. The local business journal featured me on their cover last September with the headline, "The Innovator Next Door." Ryan was there for all of it. He watched me pitch to venture capitalists when we needed Series A funding. He celebrated with the team when we landed our first $1 million account. He was in the conference room when I negotiated the partnership deal with Meridian Industries that doubled our annual revenue overnight.
He knows that when I say I'm building something, I'm not delusional or living in a fantasy. I've already built it. I'm running it. I'm succeeding at it in ways that would probably shock my family if they ever bothered to look past their assumptions. But sitting at that brunch table watching Victoria tear me down while Ryan sat frozen in his chair, I realized that my silence had become a different kind of lie. I'd been so focused on avoiding my family's judgment that I'd trapped myself in their narrow perception of who I was supposed to be. And now that perception was about to collide with reality in the most spectacular way possible. The moment that would change everything started with Victoria's phone buzzing against the white tablecloth. She glanced at it, rolled her eyes dramatically, and announced to the table, "Ugh, it's my friend Elena from college. She's always bragging about her startup or whatever." Ryan's coffee cup clinked against the saucer as he set it down too quickly. "Elena Martinez?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yeah, you probably don't know her," Victoria said dismissively. "She went to Westfield too, but she was in the business program. Now she thinks she's some hotshot entrepreneur because she started some little company. She keeps posting about it on Instagram like anyone cares." I knew Elena Martinez very well. She was one of my biggest competitors and, lately, one of my most persistent admirers. Her company, Phoenix Digital, had been trying to poach 3 of my senior developers for the past 6 months. Just last week, she'd called me personally to propose a partnership, saying that Zenith's client management system was revolutionary and that she'd love to find ways our companies could collaborate instead of compete. "What kind of company?" Ryan asked, his voice carefully neutral. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was gripping his napkin like a lifeline. "Some digital marketing thing." Victoria waved her hand vaguely. "She's always posting photos from fancy offices and talking about scaling her business and disrupting the industry. It's so pretentious. Like, just get a normal job, you know?" The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with my butter knife. Victoria was complaining about Elena's success in digital marketing while sitting across from someone who'd built a more successful digital marketing company than Elena ever dreamed of. And her fiancé, the man nodding along sympathetically, worked for me. "Actually," I said carefully, "digital marketing is a pretty legitimate industry. It's worth billions globally." Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and condescending. "Ugh, Cassie, you would defend it. You're both living in the same fantasy world. The difference is that Elena at least admits she's trying to be some big shot CEO, while you pretend to be content with your little freelance thing." Ryan had gone completely still.
I watched his face carefully, seeing the exact moment when he realized where this conversation was heading. His eyes met mine across the table, and I saw something that looked almost like panic. Because Ryan knew exactly who Elena Martinez was. He'd been in the meeting 3 months ago when Elena had tried to recruit our lead developer, offering him a $40,000 raise to jump ship. He'd been there when I'd countered with a $50,000 raise plus equity options, keeping our team intact. He'd seen Elena's offer letter, had even helped me craft our retention strategy. More importantly, he'd been in the conference room last month when Elena herself had called to congratulate me on landing the Morrison Industries account, a $3.8 million contract that had been the biggest win in Zenith's history. Elena had called me one of the most innovative minds in digital marketing and suggested we grab coffee to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. What kind of company? She's always posting photos from fancy offices and talking about scaling her business and disrupting the industry. It's so pretentious. Like, just get a normal job, you know? The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with my butter knife. Victoria was complaining about Elena's success in digital marketing while sitting across from someone who'd built a more successful digital marketing company than Elena ever dreamed of. And her fiancé, the man nodding along sympathetically, worked for me. Actually, I said carefully, digital marketing is a pretty legitimate industry. It's worth billions globally. Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and condescending. Oh, Cassie, you would defend it. You're both living in the same fantasy world. The difference is that Elena at least admits she's trying to be some big shot CEO, while you pretend to be content with your little freelance thing. Ryan had gone completely still. I watched his face carefully, seeing the exact moment when he realized where this conversation was heading. His eyes met mine across the table, and I saw something that looked almost like panic. Because Ryan knew exactly who Elena Martinez was. He'd been in the meeting 3 months ago when Elena had tried to recruit our lead developer, offering him a $40,000 raise to jump ship. He'd been there when I'd countered with a $50,000 raise plus equity options, keeping our team intact. He'd seen Elena's offer letter, had even helped me craft our retention strategy. More importantly, he'd been in the conference room last month when Elena herself had called to congratulate me on landing the Morrison Industries account, a $3.8 million contract that had been the biggest win in Zenith's history. Elena had called me one of the most innovative minds in digital marketing and suggested we grab coffee to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. You know what Elena posted yesterday? Victoria continued, scrolling through her phone. A photo of some award she won. Emerging Entrepreneur of the Year or something equally ridiculous. The caption was all about building something meaningful and grateful for the journey. So cringe. I knew about that award. Elena had beaten out 47 other nominees to win the Regional Business Council's Emerging Entrepreneur recognition. It was a legitimate honor, one that came with significant media attention and networking opportunities. I also knew that I'd been nominated for the same award 2 years ago and had won. The trophy was sitting on the bookshelf in my office at Zenith, along with 3 other industry awards I'd received since starting the company. But unlike Elena, I'd never posted about them on social media. I'd never shared the success with my family. I'd never let anyone beyond my professional circle know about the recognition. Some people just need constant validation, Victoria said, putting her phone down with satisfaction. They have to make everything about them, post every little achievement like they're changing the world. It's exhausting. Ryan made a sound that might have been agreement, but his face had gone pale again. He knew about my awards because he'd been there for most of them. He'd helped plan the celebration dinner when I'd won the Innovation in Digital Marketing Excellence Award. He'd written the press release when Zenith was named one of the top 10 companies to watch by Business Forward magazine. I mean, seriously, how hard can it be to start a little marketing company? You make a website, get a few clients, and suddenly you think you're the next Steve Jobs. It's not like she's performing brain surgery or arguing cases in front of the Supreme Court. The comment hit exactly where Victoria intended it to. A not-so-subtle reminder of the law degree I'd never finished, the respectable career path I had abandoned. But what she didn't realize was that building Zenith had been infinitely more challenging than memorizing case law would have been. Starting a company meant 18-hour days for the first 2 years. It meant maxing out my credit cards to buy equipment before our first revenue check cleared. It meant learning accounting, human resources, legal compliance, and strategic planning while simultaneously coding our platform and pitching to clients. It meant lying awake at night wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, if my parents were right about needing the security of a traditional career. It meant facing rejection after rejection from investors who didn't believe a college dropout could build something sustainable. But it also meant the incredible satisfaction of seeing an idea become reality. It meant creating jobs for 47 people, solving real problems for hundreds of businesses, building something that mattered. Ryan knew all of this. He'd joined during the early days when we were still scrappy and uncertain, when success wasn't guaranteed but passion was abundant. He'd seen me work through problems that would have broken most people. He'd watched me make decisions that saved the company during our most challenging moments. And now he was watching my sister mock everything we'd built together, everything I'd accomplished, while having no idea that she was describing my life, not Elena's. The thing that really gets me, Victoria said, stabbing her salad again, is how these people always act like they're so much more successful than everyone else. Like their little startups make them better than people with real careers. She looked directly at me when she said it, her message crystal clear. In Victoria's world, they were people with real careers, like her corporate communications job or Ryan's marketing director position. And then there were people like Elena and me, plain entrepreneur and pretending it mattered. What she couldn't possibly know was that in 3 minutes, her perfectly constructed narrative was about to explode. Before I tell you exactly how this whole situation exploded in the most spectacular way possible, I need to ask you something. Have you ever sat there while someone completely rewrote your story? Have you ever been in a room where people who claim to love you are describing a version of your life that doesn't exist? Because that's exactly what was happening to me at that brunch table. Victoria wasn't just dismissing my career, she was dismissing my entire identity, my worth, my 5 years of relentless work, while my own employees sat there knowing the truth but unable to speak. And if you've ever been there, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, then you know exactly what was building up inside me. That mixture of frustration and disbelief and pure rage that comes from being completely misunderstood by the people who should know you best. Maybe you've been the family member who never quite figured it out. Maybe you're the one whose achievements get downplayed at holiday dinners. Maybe you're the sibling who gets introduced with a sigh and an apologetic smile, like you're the family's little project that never quite succeeded. Or maybe you've been on the other side. Maybe you've made assumptions about someone's life based on incomplete information. Maybe you've dismissed someone's dreams because they didn't look like the success you expected to see. Either way, I want you to stick around for this story because what happened next changed everything, not just for me and Victoria, but for everyone at that table. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt like you had to prove your worth to people who should have seen it all along, because this moment of truth was 5 years in the making. Here's what you need to understand about family dynamics when someone breaks the expected script. When I left Westfield University, I didn't just disappoint my parents, I shattered their entire vision of who I was supposed to become. In their minds, I was destined to be a lawyer like my father, to follow the safe, predictable path they'd mapped out for me. Victoria, on the other hand, had always been the golden child. She graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, landed her corporate job straight out of college, and followed every conventional marker of success. She got promoted on schedule, bought a nice car, moved to a respectable apartment. She was everything my parents understood and approved of. So when I dropped out and moved to Millbrook, it created this narrative that was convenient for everyone. Victoria became the responsible daughter, the one who made smart choices. I became the cautionary tale, the one who threw away her potential. The problem with family narratives is that once they're established, they become incredibly difficult to change. Even when evidence contradicts the story, people find ways to maintain their beliefs. When I moved into my loft downtown, my parents assumed I was house sitting. When I bought my car, a hybrid SUV that I paid for in cash, they thought I'd gotten a loan I couldn't afford. Victoria needed me to be unsuccessful because my failure validated her choices. If I had actually succeeded after dropping out of college, what would that say about the conventional path she'd worked so hard to follow? It was easier to believe I was struggling than to question whether there might be multiple ways to build a meaningful life. But Ryan knew better. Ryan had seen what unconventional success actually looked like. He'd watched me build something from nothing, had been part of the team that turned an idea into a thriving business. He knew that success doesn't always look like what people expect it to look like.
When he joined Zenith, Ryan was burned out from working at a traditional company where creativity was discouraged and innovation was stifled. He'd spent 2 years writing the same types of campaigns, following the same outdated strategies, watching clients get mediocre results because his bosses were afraid to try anything new. At Zenith, everything was different. We encouraged experimentation. We gave our team the freedom to propose bold ideas and the resources to implement them. Ryan had thrived in that environment, had become one of our most valuable team members because we recognized his potential and gave him room to grow. That's what made this brunch so surreal for him. He was watching the person who'd believed in him, who'd given him opportunities to succeed, being called a pathetic loser by her own sister. He was seeing firsthand how families can be blind to someone's actual achievements while celebrating more conventional forms of success. And here's something I want everyone watching this to understand. Your family's perception of your worth is not the truth about your worth. The people who raised you, who think they know everything about you, can sometimes be the most blind to who you've actually become. Maybe your parents still see you as the teenager who struggled in high school, even though you've built an amazing career. Maybe your siblings still treat you like the family screw-up, even though you've overcome incredible challenges. Maybe your relatives still ask when you're going to get a real job, even though you're already successful in ways they don't recognize or understand. The truth is that some people will never see your success because it doesn't match their definition of what success should look like. Some people will dismiss your achievements because acknowledging them would force them to reconsider their own choices. Some people will keep you trapped in old stories because the new story threatens their worldview. But here's what I learned that day at brunch. You can't control other people's perceptions, but you can control whether you continue to enable them. You can't force someone to see your worth, but you can stop hiding it. You can't make your family understand your choices, but you can stop apologizing for them. What was about to happen at that table wasn't just a revelation, it was a reckoning. 5 years of misunderstandings, assumptions, and carefully maintained lies were about to collide with the truth in the most dramatic way possible. And Ryan Henderson, sitting there in his perfectly pressed shirt, knowing exactly who I really was, but trapped by the secret I'd asked him to keep, was about to become the catalyst for everything that followed. To understand how we got to that explosive moment at brunch, you need to know how this whole deception started. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't planned. It was just one conversation that spiraled into 5 years of silence. The first time I lied to my family about my life was at Christmas dinner 2019. I'd been in Millbrook for exactly 6 months, living in a studio apartment above a coffee shop while I worked 18-hour days building the foundation of what would become Zenith Digital Solutions.
My savings were running dangerously low, I was surviving on ramen noodles and determination, and I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks. Victoria had just announced her promotion to Senior Communications Specialist at Meridian Insurance. The whole family was celebrating, champagne glasses raised, toasts being made, everyone praising her dedication and work ethic. Mom kept saying how proud she was that Victoria had found her calling in corporate communications. When the attention inevitably turned to me, I made my first critical mistake. "How's the job search going, sweetheart?" Dad asked, cutting into his prime rib. "Any law firms in Millbrook showing interest?" I should have told them the truth right then. I should have explained that I wasn't looking for law jobs because I was building something entirely different. But looking around that table, at Victoria glowing with well-deserved praise, at my parents beaming with pride, I couldn't bring myself to admit that I was basically unemployed, burning through my savings on a business idea that might fail spectacularly. "Actually," I said carefully, "I'm doing some contract work, digital marketing consulting for local businesses." It wasn't technically a lie. I did have 3 small clients paying me a total of $1,800 a month to manage their social media accounts and basic email campaigns. But calling it consulting made it sound more legitimate than it actually was. "Oh," Mom said, her smile faltering slightly. "Well, that's practical. A good way to network while you figure out your next steps." "Are you making enough to live on?" Dad asked, the concern in his voice making my chest tight. "Getting by," which was true if you considered eating cereal for dinner and wearing the same 3 outfits on rotation, getting by. Victoria jumped in with what she probably thought was sisterly support. "That's smart, Cassie. Building up some real-world experience before you go back to law school shows maturity." And there it was, the assumption that became the foundation for everything that followed. Victoria had interpreted my vague description of digital marketing consulting as temporary work, a gap year activity while I figured out my real career. The family had collectively decided that I was taking time to mature before returning to the path they had chosen for me. I should have corrected them immediately, but Victoria looked so relieved that I wasn't competing with her moment of success, and my parents looked so hopeful that I was being responsible about my future that I just nodded and let them believe whatever made them comfortable.
That one conversation set the pattern for every family interaction that followed. At Easter 2020, when Zenith had grown to 8 employees and $200,000 in annual revenue, I was still doing some consulting work. At Thanksgiving that year, when we just signed our first 6-figure client, I was still helping local businesses with their marketing. The longer the lie persisted, the harder it became to tell the truth. How do you explain to your family that you've been deliberately misleading them for months? How do you admit that the little consulting work they've been politely tolerating is actually a thriving business that's exceeded every projection you dared to make? By summer 2021, Zenith had 15 employees and had moved into our first real office space. We'd been featured in the Millbrook Business Journal as one of the city's rising star companies. I'd hired Ryan Henderson as our marketing specialist, and our client roster included 3 Fortune 500 companies. But at Victoria's birthday party that July, I was still Cassie who does freelance computer stuff. The truth is, I'd become addicted to being underestimated. There was something liberating about attending family events without having to perform success or justify my choices. I could show up, eat good food, listen to Victoria's stories about her latest campaigns, and leave without anyone asking probing questions about my business model or growth projections. My parents stopped asking when I was going back to law school because they'd convinced themselves I was finding my way through trial and error. Victoria stopped feeling competitive with me because she'd categorized my work as a hobby rather than a career. Even my extended family had settled into treating me as the family's creative type. Interesting, but not quite serious. The deception became self-reinforcing. Every family gathering where I downplayed my success made it harder to reveal the truth at the next one. Every time someone made a sympathetic comment about my unconventional path, I felt the gap widening between who they thought I was and who I'd actually become. By 2022, the lives had taken on their own life.
Zenith was approaching 30 employees. I'd bought my loft, and I was speaking at digital marketing conferences across the region, but my family still thought I was struggling to make ends meet as a freelancer. The irony was that I'd become more successful than Victoria by almost any objective measure, but she remained the family's pride and joy while I remained their sympathetic charity case. She made $68,000 a year. I'd made $240,000. She managed social media for one company. I oversaw marketing strategies for dozens. She had a nice apartment. I owned premium real estate. But because success doesn't count if nobody knows about it, Victoria continued to be celebrated while I continued to be pitied. The worst part was watching my parents worry about me. Mom would slip me $20 bills for groceries when she thought no one was looking. Dad would forward job listings for entry-level marketing positions that paid less than I made in a week. They thought they were helping their struggling daughter, not realizing that their struggling daughter was actually one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the city. I told myself I was protecting them from disappointment if the business failed. I told myself I was avoiding their questions and unsolicited advice. I told myself it was easier to let them think what they wanted to think. But really, I was protecting myself from having to admit that I'd chosen a completely different life than the one they'd planned for me. And it had worked out better than any of us could have imagined. The lie had become so comfortable, so convenient, that I'd forgotten it was a lie at all. Until Ryan Henderson walked into my family's life and made it impossible to maintain the fiction any longer. While my family thought I was struggling to make ends meet, I was building an empire they couldn't even imagine. The contrast between their perception and my reality became more absurd with each passing month. In January 2022, while Victoria was bragging about managing a $50,000 social media campaign for Meridian Insurance, I was closing the deal on our biggest contract to date, a $1.2 million annual agreement with Blackstone Manufacturing to completely overhaul their digital presence across 17 states. The negotiation took 3 months, involved meetings with their C-suite executives, and required me to present our strategy to their board of directors. I remember calling my parents that same week to check in, and Mom asked if I was still doing that computer work. When I said yes, she sighed and said, "Well, at least it's keeping you busy while you figure things out." If only she knew that figuring things out had resulted in Zenith being named one of the top 3 digital marketing agencies in the tri-state region by Industry Excellence magazine. By spring 2022, we'd outgrown our Maple Street office and moved into the renovated textile mill downtown, 5,000 square feet across 2 floors with exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and an open concept design that screamed success. The space cost us $18,000 a month in rent, more than Victoria made in salary every quarter. But when Uncle Frank asked at Easter dinner what kind of office I was working from, I just said downtown and let him assume I meant a co-working space or coffee shop.
The growth was exponential and exhausting. In 6 months, we hired 12 new employees, including 3 senior developers I'd recruited from a Silicon Valley startup, paying them salaries that would have shocked my family. Sarah Chen, our lead UX designer, was making $140,000 a year. Marcus Rodriguez, our data analytics specialist, earned $155,000 plus equity options. These weren't freelancers or contractors. They were full-time employees with benefits, health insurance, retirement plans, and professional development budgets. I was responsible for their livelihoods, their career growth, their family's financial security. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. Meanwhile, at family gatherings, relatives would pat my shoulder sympathetically and ask if I was still trying to make that internet thing work. The summer of 2022 brought our most significant breakthrough. After 8 months of presentations, proposals, and negotiations, we won the contract to handle digital marketing for the entire Hartwell Corporation portfolio, 37 companies ranging from logistics to hospitality to manufacturing. The deal was worth $3.8 million over 2 years, the largest single contract any agency in Millbrook had ever secured. The signing ceremony was covered by 3 business publications. The mayor attended and gave a speech about Millbrook's growing reputation as a tech hub. I was photographed shaking hands with James Hartwell himself, the billionaire CEO whose companies employed over 200,000 people worldwide. That same week, Victoria called to complain about how stressed she was managing Meridian Insurance's rebranding project, a $35,000 internal initiative that would take her 3 months to complete. I listened sympathetically and asked all the right supportive questions, never mentioning that I'd just signed a contract worth more than her entire annual salary multiplied by 50. The success brought opportunities I'd never imagined. Harvard Business School invited me to speak at their entrepreneurship symposium. Forbes reached out for an interview about young leaders disrupting traditional industries. The State Economic Development Council asked me to join their technology advisory board. But I turned them all down or found ways to participate without drawing attention that might reach my family's social circles. I couldn't risk someone from Westfield seeing an article about local college dropout builds million-dollar empire and sharing it at a reunion Victoria might attend. Fall 2022 was when everything really accelerated. We launched Zenith Connect, our proprietary customer relationship management platform that automated everything from initial lead generation to post-sale follow-up. The development had taken 18 months and cost us $400,000 in programming and testing, but the results were revolutionary. Within 3 months, Zenith Connect had attracted the attention of major players in the industry. Salesforce wanted to discuss acquisition possibilities. Microsoft invited me to their annual partners conference. Adobe offered to white label our technology for their enterprise clients. I was flying to meetings in New York, San Francisco, and Chicago, staying in 5-star hotels, dining with executives whose companies were worth billions. My business expenses for November alone exceeded what Victoria made in 2 months. But when Thanksgiving rolled around and Dad asked how the consulting work was going, I just smiled and said, "Pretty well, staying busy." The isolation was becoming unbearable. I had 43 employees who understood my vision, respected my leadership, and celebrated our shared successes. I had industry peers who sought my advice, competitors who studied our strategies, and clients who trusted me with their most important marketing initiatives. But I couldn't share any of it with the people who'd raised me, who'd supposedly known me longest, who claimed to want the best for me. The breaking point came in December 2022, when Zenith was chosen as Company of the Year by the Regional Business Association. The award came with a $25,000 grant, a feature story in 6 major publications, and an invitation to the Governor's Economic Summit. I attended the ceremony alone, accepted the award while thinking about how proud my parents would be if they knew, and went home to my empty loft feeling more successful and more lonely than I'd ever been in my life. That night, I almost called my mother to tell her everything. I drafted the text message 17 times, "Mom, I need to tell you something about my work." But every time I got close to sending it, I imagined the questions, the explanations, the hurt feelings about the years of deception. So I deleted the message and went to bed, telling myself I'd find the right moment eventually. 3 months later, Ryan Henderson started dating my sister, and suddenly the secret I'd been carefully guarding for years was sitting at my family's dinner table making small talk about his marketing director job at some tech company. I knew the truth couldn't stay hidden much longer. I just had no idea how spectacularly it would all unravel at a Sunday brunch in downtown Millbrook. The months leading up to that disastrous brunch were like watching a slow-motion collision that I was powerless to stop. Ryan had started dating Victoria in March 2023, and every family interaction became a minefield of potential exposure. The first time Victoria brought Ryan to Sunday dinner at my parents' house, I almost choked on my wine when she introduced him as my boyfriend who works in marketing. She had no idea that the marketing company he worked for was mine, or that he'd been promoted to senior director just 2 weeks earlier after successfully launching a campaign that brought in $2.1 million in new business. Ryan spotted me across the dining room, and his face went completely white. We'd worked together for 2 years at that point, had collaborated on dozens of campaigns, had celebrated major wins together. But in that moment, we both realized that our professional relationship was about to collide with my carefully constructed family fiction in the most complicated way possible.
Cassie, Mom said warmly, come meet Victoria's new boyfriend. Ryan, this is our other daughter, the one I told you about who does freelance work. Ryan extended his hand with the most awkward smile I'd ever seen. Nice to meet you, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Likewise, I managed, shaking the hand of my own employee while my mother described me as a freelancer to his face. The dinner was excruciating. Victoria spent most of the evening detailing Ryan's career achievements, how he'd worked his way up in digital marketing, how he was really good with social media and analytics, how his company was pretty successful for a regional firm. Meanwhile, Ryan sat there nodding politely while she unknowingly described his job at my company to me. When she mentioned that his workplace had about 40 employees, I nearly laughed at the irony. We'd hit exactly 47 the week before when I had hired 3 new content creators. What kind of campaigns do you work on? Dad asked Ryan, genuinely interested in learning about his future son-in-law's career. Ryan glanced at me quickly before answering. Mostly B2B digital marketing, lead generation, customer retention, brand awareness. We work with a lot of manufacturing and technology companies. It was technically accurate, but deliberately vague. He couldn't mention specific clients without revealing information that would immediately identify Zenith. He couldn't discuss our recent wins without raising questions about how a regional firm was landing Fortune 500 contracts. Victoria jumped in proudly. His company just won some big account. What was it, honey? Something with logistics? Hartwell Corporation, Ryan said quietly, not looking at me. I felt my chest tighten. That was our account, the one I'd personally negotiated, the contract that had required 6 months of presentations and strategy sessions. Ryan had been instrumental in the pitch process, had developed the analytics framework that convinced Hartwell's board to choose us over 3 larger agencies. That's wonderful, Mom said. How exciting to work on such big projects. The conversation continued with Victoria explaining how proud she was of Ryan's success, how he was really making a name for himself in digital marketing. She had no idea that every achievement she was celebrating had happened at my company under my leadership with strategies I'd approved. Over the following months, the situation became increasingly surreal. Victoria would call me to share updates about Ryan's work life, unknowingly describing my own business decisions back to me. Ryan's company is expanding again, she'd say excitedly. They're hiring like crazy. His boss must really know what she's doing. I was the boss she was talking about. I'd approved the hiring surge that brought our team to 52 employees by June. I'd signed off on the salary increases that allowed Ryan to afford the engagement ring he was planning to buy. They're moving to even bigger office, Victoria reported after another dinner date. Ryan says the new space is incredible. Floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick, really modern. His boss has great taste. I'd spent 3 months designing that office space. I'd personally selected every piece of furniture, approved every design element, negotiated every aspect of the lease. Victoria was praising my taste without knowing it. The worst part was watching Ryan navigate the increasingly complex web of half-truths and omissions. During family gatherings, he had to be careful not to reveal too much about his boss or specific company details. He couldn't mention business trips we'd taken together, conferences where I'd been the keynote speaker, or industry awards Zenith had won. At my cousin's wedding in July, Victoria spent 20 minutes telling relatives about how well Ryan was doing at his marketing job, while he stood next to her looking progressively more uncomfortable. When Uncle Frank asked what company he worked for, Ryan said Zenith Digital Solutions so quietly that most people didn't catch the name. But I caught it, and I saw the look of panic that crossed his face when he realized he'd said it out loud in front of my family. Fortunately, Victoria was in the middle of describing her own promotion at Meridian Insurance, so nobody really paid attention to Ryan's answer. But the close call left both of us shaken. The pressure was affecting Ryan's work performance. He became hesitant to discuss strategy in team meetings, worried about accidentally revealing information he'd learned from Victoria about family expectations or assumptions. During our quarterly review in August, he finally asked the question I'd been dreading. Cassandra, should I tell Victoria who you really are? This is getting really complicated. I'd asked him to keep quiet when they first started dating, explaining that my family situation was complicated and I needed time to figure out how to handle it. But 6 months later, we were both trapped in a deception that was becoming harder to maintain. Not yet, I told him. I need to find the right way to tell them myself. But every week that passed made the truth harder to reveal. Every family dinner where Victoria praised Ryan's successful career while dismissing my freelance hobby made the eventual revelation more explosive. Every conversation where she unknowingly described my achievements as his made the situation more absurd. By October, Victoria was planning their engagement and talking about Ryan as her successful marketing executive fiancé. She'd started making not-so-subtle comparisons between his career trajectory and my supposed lack of direction.
I'm so lucky to have found someone who's really building something meaningful, she said during a sister's lunch in November. Ryan's company is doing so well. They're probably going to double in size next year. She was right about the growth projections. I'd just approved the business plan that would take us from 52 employees to over 100 by the end of 2024. But hearing her celebrate my success as Ryan's achievement while simultaneously dismissing my life as meaningless was more than I could bear. The engagement party was scheduled for December. Victoria wanted it to be perfect, a celebration of her relationship with her accomplished fiancé, surrounded by family and friends who could appreciate their mutual success. I knew that party would be the breaking point. I could feel the truth building pressure like steam in a kettle, and I knew that sooner or later, something was going to give. The explosion happened faster than I could have imagined. One moment, Victoria was mocking Elena Martinez and digital marketing entrepreneurs, and the next moment, our entire family dynamic was about to shatter like glass. It started when Victoria's phone buzzed again with another notification from Elena's Instagram. She couldn't resist checking it, and what she saw made her face twist with disgust. "Oh my God, you have to see this," Victoria said, holding up her phone. Elena just posted a picture of herself with some CEO at a business conference. The caption says, "Grateful to share insights on digital innovation with industry leaders." Like, who even talks like that? Ryan had gone completely rigid beside her. His knuckles were white as he gripped his coffee cup, and I could see a thin line of sweat forming at his hairline despite the restaurant's air conditioning. "Let me see," I said, reaching for the phone before I could stop myself. The photo showed Elena Martinez shaking hands with David Richardson, the CEO of Technova Industries, a man I knew very well because we'd had dinner 3 months ago when he'd tried to convince me to sell Zenith to his conglomerate for $85 million. Elena was wearing the same navy blazer she'd worn to our industry lunch last year when she'd attempted to poach my head of development. "This is from the Digital Future Summit in Chicago," I said without thinking. Richardson was the keynote speaker. Elena spoke on the Emerging Technologies panel. Victoria stared at me. "How do you know that?"
The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Ryan was looking at me with pure panic in his eyes, silently pleading with me not to answer. But I was so tired of pretending, so exhausted from 5 years of hiding who I really was, that the truth started spilling out before I could stop it. "Because I was invited to speak at the same conference," I said quietly. "I turned it down because I didn't want anyone from our family's social circle to see the coverage." "You were invited to speak?" Victoria's voice cracked with disbelief. "At a business conference? About what?" Ryan made a small, desperate sound that might have been a warning, but it was too late. The dam had burst. "About digital marketing innovation, about building scalable customer acquisition systems, about the future of B2B relationship management in the digital economy." The table went dead silent. Victoria was staring at me like I just announced I was secretly an astronaut. My parents had frozen with their mimosas halfway to their lips. "Cassie," Dad said slowly, "what exactly do you do for work?" This was it. The moment I'd been dreading and anticipating for 5 years. I looked at Ryan, who had his eyes closed like he was preparing for impact. I looked at Victoria, whose face was cycling through emotions like confusion, disbelief, and the first hints of dawning realization. "I'm the founder and CEO of Zenith Digital Solutions," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "We're a digital marketing agency with 52 employees and annual revenues of $47 million. Ryan works for me as senior marketing director." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the coffee machine hissing in the kitchen 3 tables away. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to speak underwater. Her eyes darted between Ryan and me, processing the implications at light speed. "That's impossible," she whispered finally. "Ryan, tell her that's impossible." Ryan didn't say anything. He couldn't say anything. His face had gone from pale to gray, and he was staring at the table like he wished it would swallow him whole. "Ryan," Victoria's voice was getting sharper, more desperate. "Tell me she's lying. Tell me this is some kind of joke." When Ryan finally looked up, his expression was resignation mixed with relief. "She's not lying, Victoria. Cassandra is my boss. She has been for 2.5 years. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She actually recoiled in her chair, her hand flying to her throat. "You work for her?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "You work for Cassie?" "I work for Cassandra Gomez, CEO of Zenith Digital Solutions," Ryan said, his voice gaining strength as the secret finally came out. "She hired me in 2021. She promoted me twice. She approved my salary increases, my bonuses, my vacation requests. The Hartwell Corporation account I told you about, that was her deal. She negotiated it personally." Victoria's face was cycling through emotions so quickly I couldn't track them all. Shock, disbelief, anger, humiliation, they were all there, fighting for dominance. "But you said," she started then stopped, "you told us you worked at some regional marketing firm." "I do work at a regional marketing firm. It just happens to be the most successful one in the tri-state area, and it happens to be owned by your sister."
Mom finally found her voice. "Cassie, is this true? Are you really the youngest female CEO in Millbrook's history?" I said, the words feeling strange and wonderful to finally speak out loud. "Regional Business Association's Company of the Year, Forbes 30 Under 30 nominee. Zenith has been profitable every quarter for the past 3 years, and we're projected to hit $65 million in revenue next year." Dad set down his mimosa with shaking hands. "But you told us you were doing freelance work. You said you were just getting by." "I was freelancing when I started, but that was 5 years ago. I've been building Zenith ever since. The tiny apartment you think I live in? I own a 2,500 square foot loft in the textile mill downtown, the same building where my company occupies 2 full floors." Victoria made a sound that was part gasp, part sob. "You own the company in the textile mill? The one with the huge windows and the modern furniture?"
I designed that office myself, I said. Ryan helped me pick out the conference room table where we hold our weekly strategy meetings. The truth was cascading out now, unstoppable. Every detail Victoria had unknowingly praised about Ryan's workplace was actually my creation, my vision, my success. The impressive boss she'd mentioned was me. The expanding company she'd celebrated was mine. "How long have you known, Ryan?" Victoria asked, her voice breaking. "How long have you been lying to me?" "I haven't been lying," Ryan said desperately. "I just couldn't tell you the truth without betraying Cassandra's confidence. She asked me not to say anything about her real job, and I respected that." "Respected what?" Victoria's voice was rising now, drawing stares from other tables. "You let me think my sister was a failure while she was actually your boss? You let me feel sorry for her while she was signing your paychecks?" The full scope of the deception was hitting her now, and I could see the humiliation spreading across her face like a stain. Every conversation, she'd praised Ryan's success while dismissing my life. Every family dinner where she'd positioned herself as the accomplished sister while I played the family disappointment. Every moment of superiority she'd felt was crumbling in real time. "Victoria," I started, but she held up her hand to stop me. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking with rage and embarrassment. "Just don't." What happened next was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Victoria sat there for a full 30 seconds, processing the magnitude of what she'd just learned, and then she absolutely exploded. "You've been lying to us for 5 years?" Her voice was loud enough that conversations at nearby tables stopped entirely. "You've been pretending to be poor while you're actually a millionaire?" "I never pretended to be poor," I said carefully. "I just didn't correct your assumptions." "My assumptions?" Victoria's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You told us you were doing freelance work. You said you were just getting by. You let Mom slip you money for groceries. You let Dad send you job listings for entry-level positions." The accusations hit like physical blows because they were all true. I had let my parents worry about my finances while I was making more money than both of them combined. I had accepted their sympathy and their help while building a multi-million-dollar company. "Victoria, please lower your voice," Mom said, glancing around at the other diners who were now openly staring at our table. "Lower my voice? Mom, do you understand what just happened? Your struggling daughter has been lying to us for half a decade. She owns a company. She's Ryan's boss. Everything we thought we knew about her life is completely fake." Dad was still staring at me like he was seeing a stranger. "Cassie, why would you do this? Why would you let us think you were struggling?" The hurt in his voice was worse than Victoria's anger. My father had spent 5 years worrying about my future, wondering if he'd failed as a parent because his daughter couldn't seem to figure her life out. And all that worry had been unnecessary, based on lies I'd allowed him to believe. "I didn't mean for it to go on this long," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "It started as just not wanting to explain everything at Christmas dinner. And then it became easier to let you think what you wanted to think than to deal with the questions and the judgment." "Judgment?" Mom's eyebrows shot up. "You thought you would judge you for being successful? I thought you would tell me for dropping out of law school to start a company. I thought you'd tell me it was too risky, that I should have a backup plan, that I was throwing my education away. So I just stayed quiet." Victoria was shaking her head in disbelief. "You stayed quiet? You didn't stay quiet, Cassie. You actively participated in making us look like idiots. Do you have any idea how many times I've told people about my poor sister who can't get her life together? How many times I've made sympathetic comments about your financial struggles to friends and relatives?" The humiliation in her voice was devastating to hear. I could see her replaying every conversation she'd had about me over the past 5 years, every moment when she'd positioned herself as the accomplished sister taking care of the family disappointment. And Ryan, she said, turning to face her fiancé with eyes of betrayal. How could you sit there and let me embarrass myself like that? How could you listen to me worry about Cassie's future while knowing she was your boss?
Ryan looked miserable. I wanted to tell you. I asked Cassandra multiple times if I could explain the situation, but she asked me to respect her privacy, and I work for her. I couldn't violate that trust. You work for her? Victoria repeated, like she was testing the words. My fiancé works for my sister. The successful marketing director I've been bragging about to everyone actually reports to the sister I've been pitying for years? The irony was crushing her, and I could see her working through all the implications. Every time she'd celebrated Ryan's career achievements, she'd unknowingly been celebrating my business decisions. Every promotion she'd praised had come from me. Every successful campaign she'd mentioned had been approved by me. The engagement ring, she said suddenly, her hand flying to the 3-carat diamond of her finger. You bought this with money you earned working for my sister. Ryan nodded reluctantly. My salary at Zenith allowed me to afford it, yes. Victoria pulled the ring off her finger and stared at it like it had turned into a spider. So even this, even our engagement, is connected to her success? Victoria, that's not fair, I said. Ryan earned that money. He's an incredible employee who's contributed enormously to Zenith's growth. His success is his own. Don't you dare, Victoria snapped. Don't you dare try to make this better by praising my fiancé's work performance. You've been watching me live in a fantasy world where I was the successful sister and Ryan was my accomplished partner, while the whole time you were pulling the strings behind everything. The restaurant had gone almost completely quiet around us. Other diners weren't even pretending not to listen anymore. Our server was hovering nearby, clearly wanting to check on our table, but afraid to interrupt the family meltdown happening in real time. Mom reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Honey, I'm trying to understand this. You own a company worth millions of dollars? Zenith is valued at approximately $12 million based on our last investor assessment, I said quietly. My personal stake is about 70%, so yes. The number seemed to physically stagger my parents. Dad sat back in his chair like he'd been pushed. $12 million? He repeated slowly. And you've been letting us worry about you paying rent? I bought my building. I own the loft I live in, plus I own the floors where Zenith's offices are located. The mortgage was paid off last year. Victoria made a sound like she was choking. You own real estate. Of course you do. What else haven't you told us? Do you have a yacht? A vacation home? A private jet? I have a modest investment portfolio and a healthy retirement account, but I'm not exactly living like a tech billionaire. I drive a 4-year-old hybrid and I still shop at Target. Oh, how relatable. The multimillionaire shops at Target, just like us regular people. The conversation was spiraling into territory I couldn't control. Every word I said seemed to make things worse, to highlight another aspect of the deception I'd maintained or another assumption I'd allowed my family to believe. I need some air, Victoria said abruptly, standing up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. This is too much. I can't process this right now. She grabbed her purse and headed for the restaurant's exit, leaving Ryan, my parents, and me sitting in stunned silence at a table covered with half-eaten brunch and the debris of 5 years of lies. Ryan started to get up to follow her, then looked at me uncertainly. Go, I said. She needs you right now. After he left, my parents and I sat there, in the wreckage of the family dynamic we'd maintained for so long, finally seeing each other clearly for the first time in years. The weeks following that disastrous brunch were the most challenging of my life, professionally and personally. Victoria didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. Ryan requested a temporary leave of absence from Zenith, explaining that he needed time to figure out how to navigate his relationship with both his boss and his fiancé.
My parents called twice, but seemed afraid to ask the questions they really wanted answers to. I threw myself into work with an intensity that worried my team. Sarah Chen, my lead UX designer, finally cornered me in my office on a Thursday afternoon and asked if everything was okay. Family stuff, I told her, which was the understatement of the century. The same family stuff that's had you working 16-hour days for 3 weeks? She asked skeptically. I realized then that hiding my personal struggles was just another form of the isolation I'd created by lying to my family. So I told Sarah the truth about the years of deception, about Ryan's impossible position, and the explosion at Brunch. She listened without judgment, then said something that changed my perspective entirely. You know, Cassandra, maybe the real problem isn't that you lied to them. Maybe it's that you never trusted them enough to tell them the truth. Her words hit me like a revelation. I'd spent 5 years assuming my family would react poorly to my success, but I'd never actually given them the chance to prove me wrong. I'd been so afraid of their judgment that I'd made the decision for them, robbing all of us of the opportunity to have an authentic relationship.
That night, I did something I should have done years earlier. I wrote a letter. Not a text, not an email, but an actual handwritten letter to my parents, explaining everything. Not just the facts about Zenith, but the feelings behind my deception. My fear of disappointing them again after dropping out of law school. My assumption that they wouldn't understand entrepreneurship. My growing shame about the lies that had made the truth harder to tell with each passing year. I sent copies to Victoria and Ryan as well, though I wasn't sure Victoria would even read hers. 3 days later, my mother called. "We'd like to come visit your office," she said without preamble, "if that's okay with you." The tour I gave my parents that Friday afternoon was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Walking them through Zenith's offices, introducing them to my team, showing them the conference room where major decisions were made, explaining the technology we'd developed. It felt like finally letting them into a part of my life I'd kept locked away. Dad stood in front of the wall where we displayed our client logos and awards, shaking his head slowly. "Cassie, this is incredible. Why were you afraid to show us this?" "Because I thought you'd tell me I was being irresponsible," I admitted. "I thought you'd worry about the risks, ask why I couldn't just get a steady job like Victoria." Mom looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Honey, we might have worried initially, but look what you built. Look at all these people whose livelihoods depend on the company you created. How could we be anything but proud?" The conversation we had that afternoon in my office was the most honest one we'd had in years. They admitted they'd sometimes felt shut out of my life, wondering why I never seemed to want to share details about my work. I explained how their well-meaning concerns and suggestions had felt like pressure to conform to their vision of success, rather than pursue my own. "We raised you to be independent and ambitious," Dad said. "We just forgot that meant you might choose a path we didn't understand." 2 weeks later, Victoria finally agreed to meet me for coffee. She looked tired and older somehow, like the stress of processing everything had aged her. "I've been thinking about what you said in your letter," she began, stirring her latte without looking at me. "The thing is," she continued, "I think I needed you to be unsuccessful. Not because I wanted you to fail, but because it made my own path feel more valid. If you could drop out of college and still build something amazing, what did that say about all the conventional choices I'd made?" Her honesty was devastating and healing at the same time. "Victoria, your choices are valid regardless of what I did. You built a career you love in a field you're passionate about. That matters. I know that now, but at the time, having the successful sister made me feel special. It gave me an identity that I didn't want to share." We talked for 3 hours that day, unpacking years of sibling rivalry and misunderstanding. Victoria admitted that she'd sometimes exaggerated my struggles when talking to friends and relatives because it made her feel more accomplished by comparison.
I admitted that I had enjoyed being underestimated because it allowed me to succeed without pressure or expectations. Ryan's been a mess, she said as we were getting ready to leave. He keeps saying he should have handled everything differently, that he should have found a way to tell me the truth without betraying your confidence. What are you going to do? I asked. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I love him, and I think he was in an impossible position. But we need to rebuild trust, and that's going to take some time. 6 months later, Victoria and Ryan's wedding was everything their engagement party should have been, a genuine celebration of their relationship, with no pretense or performance required. Ryan had returned to work at Zenith after a month-long leave, and we'd found a way to separate our professional and family relationships. Victoria had even started sending me potential clients, finally understanding and respecting what I'd built. My parents became Zenith's biggest champions, proudly telling anyone who would listen about their daughter's company. Dad joined our advisory board, bringing decades of legal expertise that proved invaluable. Mom started volunteering with our community outreach program, helping local small businesses understand digital marketing basics. The most unexpected change was in my own confidence. For years, I'd built an incredibly successful company while feeling like I was somehow fraudulent, like I didn't deserve the recognition or respect that came with my achievements. Hiding my success from my family had reinforced that feeling, making me question whether what I'd built was really worth celebrating.
But watching my parents' pride, seeing Victoria's genuine admiration for what Zenith had become, finally allowed me to own my success fully. I started accepting speaking engagements I'd previously declined. I said yes to the Forbes interview I'd been avoiding. I began mentoring other young entrepreneurs, sharing not just business strategies, but the importance of surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your authentic self. Zenith hit $68 million in revenue last year, exceeding our projections by 15%. We now employ 87 people across 3 locations. But more importantly, I finally have a family that knows and supports who I really am, rather than who they thought I should be. The lesson I learned from that devastating brunch and its aftermath is this: the stories we tell ourselves about other people's reactions are often more limiting than their actual reactions would be. Fear of judgment can become its own prison, one that keeps us from experiencing the love and support that might be waiting on the other side of honesty. Have you ever hidden your success because you were afraid of how others would react? Have you ever made assumptions about your family's capacity to understand and support your choices? If my story resonated with you, I want you to consider whether the relationships in your life are based on who you really are, or who you think others want you to be. Because you deserve to be seen, celebrated, and loved for your authentic self, not for the version of yourself that makes other people comfortable. And sometimes, the people who matter most are just waiting for you to trust them with the truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.